claim that we don't find these missing Precambrian animals because they were too small and they were soft-bodied. And what we now find in the Chinese fossils in the beds just beneath the Cambrian explosion are perfectly preserved, soft-bodied tissues, sponge embryos that are, of course, soft and microscopic. The new finds in the Chengjiang formations really completely put to rest the artifact hypothesis. If you can preserve an embryo, you can preserve an animal. And if those animals were there, then we should have found them. And they're not there.
Arrayed in something like their present conformation. And what this suggests is that the explosion of diversity results from the first organization of these genes in this pattern, which then provided a toolkit which could allow evolution to produce much greater variety in body shape and size and organization than could ever have existed before.
But what's interesting to me,
I think there's a fair amount of common ancestry, but I'm certainly not an advocate of universal common ancestry. I just don't think the fossil record bears that out. I think the Cambrian explosion is a perfect example where you have just you have these forms which are just there, poof, and there are no precursors.
The Cambrian is the first period of the Paleozoic era. It's a span of about 50 million years wherein the earliest forms of all the current phyla appeared and many more were already extinct by the end, and it ended hundreds of millions of years ago, before there were any mammals, reptiles, amphibians, or anything else of that sort. Not even sharks, insects, or recognizable plants existed yet. But Dembski expects us to believe that Bambi and Thumper and Curious George were suddenly poofed into a world of trees and flowers and chirping birds out of nothing all at once. He believes this only because his storybook says so, but that is not what paleontology shows, and he knows it. Very few Cambrian fauna still look like their modern descendants, and most of the rest died out since then, and some were so alien to our time as to defy classification. There were even some macroscopic animals who seem to have gone extinct before the Cambrian explosion. How is any of that either inconsistent with evolution or supportive of intelligent design?
How is it that animals as complex as trilobites and brachiopods could spring forth so suddenly, completely formed without a trace of their ancestors in the underlying strata?
Trilobites are the earliest members of a clade which today's groups were derived during the Cambrian, along with Eurypterids and Aglaspids, earlier Xiphosaurs with a dozen or so eyes on their tails of all places, and many other crazy things which survived that age, and all of them are found in a chronological sequence implying stages of development from trilobites. Even if we forget about all these subsequent or descendant groups, the family of trilobites alone eventually grew to include roughly 15,000 species, and those are just the ones that are still recognizable as trilobites. Yet all of them were already gone millions of years before the first dinosaurs appeared. How is that inconsistent with evolution, or indicative of a divine design? And incidentally, trilobites do have Precambrian precursors in the underlying strata. It's a not quite trilobite, not fully formed. It doesn't even have eyes yet. So Dembski is definitely lying when he tries to cite the Cambrian explosion as either a challenge to evolution or indicative of design, and he can't pretend not to know better because...
I was raised in a largely secular home.
To me is that these genes are turned on late in development, long after the body plan is established. A fruit fly is already a fruit fly embryo before the Hox genes kick in. The same for a human, or a worm, or a starfish. So there's no way the Hox genes can explain this rapid proliferation of body plans in the Cambrian explosion.
3.8 billion years ago, let's say 4 billion. So if we start the clock then, our 24-hour clock, 6 hours, nothing but these simple single-celled organisms appear. The same sort that we saw in the beginning. 12 hours, same thing. 18 hours, same thing. 3/4 of the day has passed and all we have are these simple single-celled organisms. Then at about the 21st hour, in the space of about 2 minutes, boom, most of the major animal forms appear in the form that they currently have in the present. And many of them persist to the present, and we have them with us today.
In biology, anytime you want to build a new structure, you have to provide new information. At the very least, to produce a new organism, like a trilobite, for example, you need a whole bunch of new cell types. And then you need new proteins to service the unique cell types. And to build the proteins, you need genetic information in the form of DNA. And the big question that the Cambrian explosion poses is, where does all that new information come from? Where does the new information come from needed to build those proteins, to service those new cell types, to build these fundamentally new forms of animals? And the Darwinians are really at a loss to answer that question. It's a sudden emergence of a huge amount of new information, and it really defies the capacity of the natural selection mutation mechanism to produce all that information. So it's really a grave difficulty. This is not a minor anomaly.
Origin of the first self-replicating molecule.
Right, and how did that happen?
I told you we don't know.
So you have no idea how it started?
No, nor has anybody.
Nor has anyone else. What do you think is the possibility that intelligent design might turn out to be the answer to some issues in genetics or in evolution?
It could come about in the following way. It could be that at some earlier time, somewhere in the universe, a civilization evolved by probably some kind of Darwinian means to a very, very high level of technology and designed a form of life that they seeded onto perhaps this planet. Now, that is a possibility and an intriguing possibility. And I suppose it's possible that you might find evidence for that if you look at the details of biochemistry, molecular biology. You might find a signature of some sort of designer.
Wait a second. Richard Dawkins thought intelligent design might be a legitimate pursuit?
And that designer could well be a higher intelligence from elsewhere in the universe. Well, but that higher intelligence would itself have had to have come about by some explicable or ultimately explicable process. It couldn't have just jumped into existence spontaneously. That's the point.
So Professor Dawkins was not against intelligent design, just certain types of designers, such as God.
So the